Energy Poverty in the World and Implications. Welcome, Professor Cleveland Jones.
You're very happy to be here again with you, Cavagna.
Thank you. This is the website, LinkedIn website of Professor Cleveland Jones. You can access and make contact with him if needed. Professor, let me start with a very short video. It's a 1 minute long, that one of the best definitions of the concept of energy poverty I saw in my life.
Poverty is the lack of access to sustainable and modern sources of energy, whether it be in products or service. Energy poverty is not consistent across the board. It also is very much tied into social and economic factors within a country. So for example, a country who has energy poverty is not able to develop the way that countries who have access to those sources do. One example would be on agricultural. So if a company does not have access to energy sources, modern sustainable energy sources, their agriculture won't develop, and that could also lead to malnutrition. It could lead to an unhealthy environment. Another example is if the energy sources are not there for a country and they're not able to invest or have a country that's investing in new technologies or new companies, it could lead to unemployment. So unfortunately, the countries who have energy poverty, it just continues, the cycle continues over and over, and they're not able to develop like a country who has energy sources that are available to them.
Yes.
Professor Cleveland, please, if you wanted to start with your presentation.
Yes, very good summary. Indeed, this is a topic that we don't hear about a lot. We hear a lot about energy shortages, mostly for the developed world. Europe is gas shortage, and so on. We hear about energy transition, but it's not very often that we hear about energy poverty. And as you have pointed out in some of your other programs, this Scott Tinker from the US is very good at talking about this topic because it has implications. Maybe we can start with the slide you just had up there. For example, one of the very shocking things that people don't realize is that the energy use among people in different regions of the world is so uneven. When we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, or many countries in Southeast Asia, even some in South America to some extent, you're talking about energy usage overall that is so low that, as this graph shows, even a refrigerator in the United States uses far more energy than those people in a year, than those people would use in all applications, heating, electricity, everything. In many cases, of course, they don't have access to even some of those energies, such as electricity. This opens up a whole theme, for example, in this switch energy competition, which I'd like to point out. Every year they have a contest where they invite groups of students from various universities to present a proposal to address energy poverty in countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India, and so many other countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, and so many others. You don't have to look at the details, but some of these students, for example, looked at Bangladesh, at Kenya, and even in less developed countries such as this, you can see that the usage of energy sources is so different. Firewood can represent more than half of the energy usage in a country. This is for cooking. Probably not so much for heating, but just for cooking, for example. And in other countries, stick and wood and even animal dung, which is collected in the fields. These are all fuels that are very harmful to the people who use them. Oftentimes they go and take them inside their homes, put them in the stoves, which are antiquated stoves, very simple, not sophisticated. They create smoke and so on. So the students that are addressing this problem, for example, they sit up and look and say, being this the situation, what can we draw as conclusions? First of all, there's short-term considerations and long-term considerations. They're looking at things, will nuclear energy be a solution? Well, for many of these countries, it's absolutely unsustainable in terms of capital cost to bring in. Some other energies are just scarce. Others are unreliable. In the long term, the objectives has to be resilient. They have to provide some kind of independence from imports, because many of these countries don't have the resources to spend on importing energy. They barely can spend resources to feed themselves. And ideally, these solutions would be directed to empowering people in their own communities without forcing migration and so on. Not very easy to achieve, of course, but just look at some of these proposals in one of these groups. They propose many solar farms. They propose wind turbine farms. Biogas plants, which are driven by refuse, waste, and some hydropower plants, which are also quite capital intensive. Most of these solutions rely on investment or loans from international institutions, or in many cases, these countries are poor enough that they can't even obtain these loans. But these are proposals that make sense. In some cases, solar farms might be viable because the capital costs might not be so much, and they're not proposing extreme amounts of resources and energy for that, because from very poor levels, you can probably establish some energy resources that are small enough in scale that you don't have to go overboard in investments. In many cases, the students, went off the board. They're proposing hundreds of millions of dollars in solutions, which would just not be viable. But look, for example, for Bangladesh, they have a problem with lack of natural gas. So they have LPG, liquid petroleum gas, in cylinders. That's a solution to bring solutions for the energy poor instead of using wood or animal dung. And they have targets for these up to 2030, for example, which is very reasonable. We are not going to be able to tackle energy poverty over 5 or 10 years. Probably it will take much longer. That's an unfortunate reality. But we have many implications which we know result from that situation. Energy poverty creates social degradation. Families spend most of their time collecting wood, or in many cases, water as well. They are poor and will remain poor. And in many cases, we're talking about miserable, not just poor. And it's very important to recognize that it's not just energy poverty in some regions or some countries, and it's all restricted to those countries. Energy poverty creates conflicts, first locally, because people have to survive and they will fight to survive, then regionally, and then finally globally. And these conflicts are already happening. Some in the Middle East, many in Africa, and in Southeast Asia. We have conflicts across borders. The resulting displacements are migration. And we already saw what migration from Northern Africa is causing great upheaval in Europe. Imagine as the energy poverty of countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Northern India, for example, that have hundreds of millions in population, displacements there could be on an unimaginable scale. And of course, this brings up very fast, and maybe we didn't even foresee many of these drastic changes in global power arrangements, because political blocs are arranged in like-minded countries, and they join together to create trade among themselves. And if they have energy poverty and they're trying to overcome that, they may try to establish trade barriers so that they can supply themselves. We've seen some of this, for example, in a different context. The BRICS try to establish greater trade among themselves because it's a power block. And energy poor countries in Africa, for example, they may have to survive by doing that, but that causes displacements and power struggles. The West is China being an intruder in the region, offering cheap solar energy. Is Russia gaining influence? These are all geopolitical implications. And of course, clean energy trends will not be enough to meet the future energy demands of the populations that are energy poor, plus the growth in those populations, because energy poverty is mostly in very populous and growing population countries. So you have a double whammy. You have energy poverty, which has to be overcome, and then you have the population explosion that will increase that demand even more. So that is a very difficult problem to tackle. We can discuss it a little bit, maybe, where we're going and what happens. I think all of this points to an all of the above, as many analysts have reasonably proposed. You're not going to solve this with one magic bullet. We need a very balanced and all of the above solution, recognizing that many countries will not even consider alternative energies or clean energies. India, Africa in many ways, China to some extent, they can't be concerned with clean fuels. That is out of the consideration at this point. This is a reality that we have to consider going forward. So we've set some of the stage for some of the basics. Maybe we can discuss some of these, Kavayan.
Perfect, Professor Cleveland. And your last point is fantastic, because the lady in the video that I presented in the very beginning of our conversation today said that it must be sustainable energy to remove poverty. And this is a question I have for you. Sustainable means green energy means what exactly? Because
if you ask, Kavanya, if you ask some of these countries what does sustainable mean, they mean it can last for the next 10 years or something. That's what they're concerned about. Oh, we're burning coal, but it's sustainable if we can keep burning coal for 10 years.
Perfect.
Clean energies, climate change, these are not pressing concerns. They're worried about where they're going to get their next meal. The presidents and the leaders of these countries are not concerned about that. They're concerned about not having a revolt because people are hungry or energy deficient. If they don't have gas, for example, to cook, or energy or coal to burn and create electricity to run even the most simple industries, that is their problem. The concern in Europe, the United States, and so on, that's a very distant concern. Unfortunately, the realities of the world is that we are indeed, facing changes that will affect all the countries. And unfortunately, the poor countries will suffer most, but they can't tackle that problem. The developed world has to provide its own solutions and offer solutions for them. This is basically not just money. It's offering technical solutions. And in many ways, for example, what I mentioned, the switch energy competition is just that. One of the which I didn't show, but one of the very best solutions, as was rated, offering very inexpensive stoves that burn the same fuels, maybe coal or wood sticks or even cow dung, but it burns it much more efficiently. That is a very good solution in some cases where you're just not even going to get close to providing natural gas or LPG for a stove. That's a reality.
How do you see Brazil in this scenario? Because Brazil has some poor parts of the country, but we do have electrification and fuels everywhere. But at the same time, we have poor parts of the country. How do you classify?
Energy poverty is a very, in some regions it's regional, but in many countries like Brazil, it's a very local problem. And in smaller pockets, Brazil is not known as an energy poor country because it does have abundant energy resources, certainly oil and gas, hydropower, even has nuclear on a small scale. There is ample bioenergy from ethanol production and so on. Biodiesel. But if you look at pockets, which is the case in many South American countries, not just Brazil, there are regions that are poor, and that poverty is reflected in the energy they consume, which is probably as close to some African countries levels of very basic energy consumption, basically for cooking. They don't have electricity to run televisions or refrigerators, and they don't have fuels to run cars, which is unimaginable for them. So we're talking about very low levels. Countries like Brazil are in a good position because they're not so poor that they can't afford, as Brazil does, have social programs to address that. And sometimes it's just financial resources being directed to regions that can provide some help. But in most cases, it is programs that develop local energy production, even biogas from refuse. In many cases, that was because many of these are agricultural regions. They provide, for example, agricultural waste that can be composted and create biogas, which can be used in community kitchens, for example. Many regions are not just agricultural. They're, for example, they have animal husbandry. And if you have pig farms and so on, another source of bioenergy is biomethanol. It's the same as biogas, the same as methane, and they can also have biomethanol and bioethanol from the crops they grow. So some countries have solutions available, others do not. The focus is on those that don't. Many in Africa and Southeast Asia.
You mentioned kitchen cooking, and the other part of the video that I brought in the beginning, the lady said that women and girls are disproportionately affected by energy poverty. Why?
Yeah, that's what I meant when I talked about misery. Energy poverty relegates a significant portion of the population, mostly women and children, to the most degrading types of work. Going out, collecting wood, cow dung or animal dung, fetching water. Those are very degrading jobs because they preclude people from having an education. They spend basically 12 hours a day doing that. You can't study if you're doing that 12 hours a day. And if the women are doing that and cooking inside the hut with cow dung, and that smoke is circulating, the children have asthma, the people who are inside get sick from respiratory diseases and many others. So this is a very close link, energy poverty and misery. And this is something that we as the world have a commitment to try to solve. Yes, we have to worry about many things. Nuclear proliferation is a concern nowadays. So is climate change. But this is a moral imperative. And indeed, some countries are making very significant inroads. India, because it's a very big 1.5 billion people, and it has great pockets of energy poverty, is in a position that it somewhat like Brazil. It has some resources that it can dedicate to this. Many other countries are not in such good position. If you look at Bangladesh, countries in Africa, Even Pakistan has a much greater problem. They have some gas resources, but not enough to supply the population. This is a major challenge of the century, because up until the 2050, for example, we are not going to get rid of energy poverty, even as we have electrification in Europe and cars flying in the United States. We will have people cooking with cow dung in many of these countries. It's inconceivable.
Yeah, that's right. Let's move a little bit to geopolitical implications of energy poverty. How do you see this world vision in terms of geopolitical?
Yeah, I think
issues?
it's somewhat like people when we're concerned, as you're aware, in many countries in the world, immigration is a hot point. In the United States, in Europe, for example, people are concerned that immigration is a threat, an existential threat, an economical threat, and to some extent it is. But we are at the very beginning of what that threat could be, because the displacements that could be caused by famine and energy poverty and displacements from even climate change, which could in the next 20, 30, 40 years begin to happen. Bangladesh is basically all at sea level, and many of these other countries, the displacements that we can come to see are just unimaginable. We're talking about millions here and so on. That looks like a lot, but countries that have 2, 3, 400 million people, and India with 1 billion and over, maybe not so much China, but many of these other countries, Africa in general, if you put many of these countries together, we're talking at another billion. And as Switch Energy says, we're talking about 5 billion people in the world that are energy restricted. Some poverty in terms of burning stakes of wood and cow dung, others with not enough energy. This is an unimaginable threat to the developed world. Where will they go? They will die like crazy trying to get there, but they will cause tremendous pressure.
But that's a good point. Sorry to interrupt you, but you see the first world, always first world is saying that they will support, they will remove poverty, they will but only speech, because in reality they do nothing about this.
Yeah, we didn't see the dollars, the $100 billion promised for energy transition for the developing world. They reiterated the promise, but the dollars are still not there. And if we see even 10, 20, 30 billion, that's still not close to 100, and 100 is not close to what we need just for energy transition, which is their agenda. Imagine what energy poverty means. It means burning much more coal and oil and gas, and that's why we will have an increasing and constant demand for those fossil fuels.
That's a good point. Is there a parallel concept between energy transition and energy poverty removal?
We will live with both, because energy transition is real. In a prior program, I mentioned to you, I am very confident that technology can bring about some drastic changes that will occur in North America and Europe, and that will be disruptive. But we will not be able to address all of the energy needs of the world like that. And even if fossil fuels remain important for the developed world, they will remain much more important in the developing world, because that is where they will start from. So as they grow from energy poverty to just energy restriction, maybe instead of burning wood, they might burn coal. And then they move from there to burning oil and gas. But by the time that they progress to advanced energies that are clean, many decades.
The first world is exporting, outsourcing the dirty work to the developing countries.
Yes, we discussed that a little bit. Indeed, for example, China and India, for example, are producing a lot of solar panels and even wind energy components. Using coal, but they are exporting that clean energy mechanisms to the developed
The
world.
first world,
And they are burning
California.
coal and also oil and so on. And they will continue to do that as long as those energies are more affordable. Maybe not the cheapest, because cheapest involves, long-term calculation. They are restricted in capital resources. They can't afford to build a very useful and inexpensive nuclear reactor because they don't have the capital for that. And if they did, they would employ it in other things, improvement in health and so on. So it is unimaginable that we could have anything but two worlds at the same time, an energy transition world and an energy poor world that's developing, demanding much more energy. And certainly from the bottom up, we're talking dirty energies, first coal, oil, and gas. And only after 20, 30 years will we get to the point where they will start demanding cleaner energy. So we're married to that reality.
Yeah. Before we go to the conclusions, suggestions, and recommendations, please explain to us what does mean this map behind you in your wall in the office?
Yeah, I mean, this I had this up, and we were looking at many countries that have problems with resource restriction for energy. This is oil and gas poor countries, for example, but this is a geopolitical analysis, because in many cases this is tied to how these countries work in terms of how. We're not even talking democracy, because that is a very Western type concept. We're talking about, does this country have the governance that it can employ planning to bring not just energy into the mix, health, food distribution. These are, education is not even a priority. These are unfortunately very foreign concepts. Let me just read some. The needs of countries as they go from basic. First, of course, you have hunger, which is immediate, hunger and drinking, clothing because of cold, and then you need a shelter. Clean water, yes, because that reduces health problems.
Sure.
Education, so that you can begin to develop the economy. We're not talking about universities. We're talking about it, basic education, so they can do something more than just cut weeds. Then you need some healthcare so the population can be more productive, and only then you start talking about human rights or environmental concerns that affect health, and even much less sustainability or climate change. So we're at the point where India, for example, is 15, 20 years behind China in its development. If it even accelerates from here, which is conceivable because technology has allowed that, it still will be in the next 10 years, for example, catching up to China. That will demand tremendous resources of energy, as well as a very strong presence internationally, which China has, for example, extended its tentacles to Africa so that it can have resources to import in raw materials to produce the solar panels, for example, and also to dominate the materials it needs for its economy. India is going to be thinking the same thing and will necessarily have to do the same thing, all powered by coal and so on. And the developed world will have to change its mentality and think not just in terms of energy transition, but in terms of geopolitical blocks that might be a threat, existential threat to the United States and Western Europe, because they also need those resources. But who is more desperate, the United States and Western Europe, or Africa, India, and so on? They needed to survive. Western countries needed to develop more and have better cars.
More sophisticated energies.
Yeah, that's going to be a race that we're going to have to think about. Yeah. And maybe geopolitics relates to diplomacy and how we talk to China and even Russia and so on about how to deal with Africa, which has great resources, and other countries as well.
Perfect.
That's going to be a big challenge.
Well, yeah, no doubt. Going to the last topic here, conclusions, suggestions, recommendations, but bullet points, please.
Yeah, when I talked about this all solutions together, I think this is a no-brainer. We can't be blindsided and pick only one solution. The other thing is I continue to focus very much on technical solutions, but those technical solutions have to reach the bottom of the pyramid. So the developed world will have to undergo a very significant shift in mindset to start
instead of sophisticated technologies, basic technologies to abroad to everyone.
Not only basic technologies, but even some of the more or less sophisticated technologies have to not just be applied in North America and Western Europe. They have to be made available in Africa, in India. Even some that they will develop have to be financed because they might actually develop them, but the World Bank or someone has to invest in that to prevent the problems that I just mentioned. Migration, poverty can create conflicts. We don't want conflicts, regional conflicts that can explode and different blocs try to take advantage of that. Pretty soon we're into big wars. So the mentality will have to change. And I think this is the greatest change that will be necessary and the most difficult change, because we're all in the developed world concerned maybe with Ukraine, Middle East. Those problems pale in comparison when we think of the whole world and where we're going, because the climate change may be real and it may affect everybody, but world conflicts, wars can be bad for everybody. So we as a developed world have to be more concerned with thinking about that. Statesmanship, diplomacy, working through the United Nations, that has to be the top item. And I just recommend that because, when we're talking about, a solution might be, as you know, that I'm a big proponent of white hydrogen, gold hydrogen.
Dreams,
yes.
like dreams, technology dreams. But
yes.
Feasible, but a long time. Yeah, time.
And not for the countries that we're talking about, where population is going to grow dramatically. So you have this double whammy that I spoke of, and it's in the best interest of the United States, Western Europe, Japan, even China, to try to solutions and work through the United Nations, which I think is now becoming clear to many people that we have to think as a global entity again to try to solve the problems, not just because of moral concerns, but because those concerns can translate into a geopolitical risks that we just can't afford to take.
Perfect.
Very good.
Thank you so much. Before we go home, I have a video, a gift for you that will end our conversation. So
Great.
Thank you so much. I will start the video and see you next time.
Great. Bye, Cavagna.
Bye. Video.
Energy poverty means living without available, affordable, reliable, and safe energy. Energy may not be available for people who live in a very rural area, far away from the electric grid, perhaps far off a road. People here can't get electricity to power lights or appliances, or get liquid fuel to run a stove, motorbike, or car. Energy may not be affordable even to people in the city, living under the grid, as they say, who can't afford the electricity that runs right over their heads. Energy may not be reliable when the grid is overloaded or poorly constructed, or when the energy supply from a generator, a solar panel, or a fuel depot is unstable.
Electricity's not working.
Energy can be unsafe when people are electrocuted from poor connections.
Yes, that looks pretty scary.
Or injured by the air pollution from burning wood and other fuels in their homes. In fact, one of the most dangerous forms of energy is burning wood, dung, charcoal, crop waste, and other biomass for heating and cooking. The indoor smoke kills millions of people each year, mostly women and children. Gaining access to affordable, reliable, and safe energy helps lift people out of poverty by providing the many benefits of a modern society. In this way, energy access is one of the most important issues in emerging and developing countries.
Thank you so much, Professor Cleveland. It's always a pleasure having you in our podcast.
Yes, very good, Kavaya. Very thought-provoking.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.